Behavior modification. To modify one's behavior, one would first have to target a behavior and then determine if the desired outcome was to increase or decrease such behaviors. Considering this session is primarily focused on the identification of behaviors, we are going to rely on the experts in the field to demonstrate a few classic examples of how behavior was first identified and then modified. Up to this point in your degree program, I am confident that these are all names that you have heard before, but in this video, I will offer a quick overview of what each theorist was famous for and how they used behavior modification in their research. There are truly many theorists that are widely recognized for their contributions to behaviorism even to this day. However, there are 4 significant players that we will recognize in this session: Ivan Pavlov, Edward Thorndike, John B. Watson, and B.F. Skinner. Like many theorists, each built their theories upon the work of another. While Sigmund Freud was deep into the woods with understanding the unobservable, unconscious part of the mind, which eventually led him down the path of concluding that it was the unconscious mental processes that were responsible for motivating people to act, Ivan Pavlov took a very different approach. Ivan Pavlov actually initially had little to do with the field of psychology. And since behaviorism was not really a real thing when he was conducting his research, he chose to direct his research in the area of observable behaviors. Here's a fun fact for you. What actually started Pavlov down his path was that he was a medical doctor that studied the digestive system. But what he needed to do to conduct his research was not acceptable to do to humans, so he ended up turning to dogs. Anyway, as I will go into some details with each of these theorists, keep in mind that each theorist found that by first recognizing the behavior of their subject, could they then try something to modify or change the identified behavior. So back to Pavlov. He is primarily famous for his work with dogs. He discovered that his dogs had the ability to involuntarily associate one thing to another. In his case, he concluded that his dogs could be taught to respond in a certain way with no mental cognition of any sort, meaning they did not have to think about it. They would involuntarily respond to a signal. This concept is called classical conditioning. And because of his research, Pavlov believed strongly that behavior could be manipulated or modified. Edward Thorndike, like Pavlov, also worked with animals, but in his case, he mostly worked with rats and cats. Thorndike is known for initiating the theory, the law of effect, or put into layman's terms, trial and error. Thorndike was all about the observable behavior. He needed to see what was happening so he could try something new, and then see how the outcome might change. In his research, he went about it this way. Thorndike would put a cat in a box with an escape route built into the box. He put a bowl of food outside the box, then observe the cat as it tried to solve the puzzle and get out of the box so they could get to the food. So the cat would try something and fail, try something again and then fail, try something another time, but this time they would succeed. Thorndike added that as his cats figured out the puzzle, they didn't bother trying new things anymore. They simply went with what was tried and true. Their association to success led them to repeat the act and then succeed again. These are the same associations that Pavlov discovered with his dogs. So how did Thorndike's cat puzzle box story end? Essentially, the cat had to push a pedal down, which unbolted the cage door, and then set them free to go eat the food, or simply be free, at least until they got caught again and placed back into the box. So now, these are 2 of the earliest players in the game. And the path has really been laid for John B. Watson and B.F. Skinner to come in and continue advancing the field of behaviorism. Although at this point, behaviorism was still not really a true discipline. John B. Watson, he had a bit of an unfortunate ending to his story. However, during his prime, he was incredibly taken by the work of Pavlov and Thorndike. And he made the claim that all, not some, all unobservable behavior was controlled. His claim was so bold that his most famous quote to this day was, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-informed, and my own specified world to bring them up, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, chief, and yes, even a beggar or a thief, regardless of their talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." Wow. Anytime I read that, I think that statement says so much about Watson as an individual. But anyway, if you are thinking that his stance is a bit cocky or proud, you are right. But regardless, Watson did build off the work of previous theorists and claimed that animals did not have the same mental capacity as humans. So began his work in the area of behavior, with his subjects primarily being humans instead of animals. Watson was most widely recognized for stimulus-response psychology, in which environmental events or stimuli elicited a type of a response. Watson was eventually credited with the establishment of the field of behaviorism, which officially branched off from psychology in the late 1950s. So finally, we take a look at B.F. Skinner. Skinner took the concepts of classical conditioning or respondent conditioning into a different direction. While Pavlov and Watson claimed that a signal was placed before the response, Skinner reversed this concept and claimed that it was the reinforcement of behavior, both positive and negative, that actually elicited the response, not just a stimulus or signal alone. Skinner coined the term operant conditioning and used rats instead of humans in his experiments. So there you have it. This is where the field of behavior modification began. The first three theorists exercised classical conditioning, while Skinner came in and offered a different perspective. These concepts are not always easy to differentiate. So here's a little trick to know the difference between the two. Pavlov used dogs in his experiments. So picture this and this phrase. "I hear a bell. It must be time to eat. Drool, drool, drool." Skinner used rats. So picture this. Picture a rat and the phrase, "It's time for food. I should press the lever so I can eat." So there you have it. Before we jump into this week's assignments, in case you were wondering what happened with Watson, well, his contributions were considerable. Later in life, he ended up having an affair, divorcing his wife. He was asked by Johns Hopkins University, where he did his research, to resign. He married the woman that he had the affair with. However, his relationship with his children went downhill very quickly. He ended up finishing up his life alone on a reclusive farm and decided to burn many of his unpublished personal papers and letters. The only real thing I can say about this is that Scripture warns us in Proverbs that pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. So on to this week's assignments. Week 1 is heavy. There are 2 discussions that are due. Please have your initial posts in by Wednesday at midnight so that we all have the opportunity to interact with one another throughout the remainder of the week. And a minimum of 2 substantiated responses are due for each discussion, and the discussions will conclude Sunday night. What do I mean by substantiated? I am not looking for, yes, I agree. Thanks for your insight. Great point, great comment. That's not what I'm looking for. You will not get participation credit for those responses. Now, those responses are encouraged because it's great to interact with your teammates. But what I am looking for specifically is for you to respond to their response with an educated response or an academic response. If you are choosing to use the Blackboard app, that's totally fine. But if you end up voicing or dictating your response, please go back before you post and correct any grammar or punctuation. That is something that I will take points off for because this is an academic course. This is something that we need to be using correct grammar and punctuation anytime we are interacting with one another. There are also 2 additional assignments due Sunday, a behavior analysis paper and a graphing review paper. If you need any clarification on assignments, please don't hesitate to comment in the student lounge or send me an email or a text. Until week 2, everyone, I will upload another video then. And remember, much of the study of behavior starts with self-awareness. Only when you start recognizing your own behavior can you start recognizing the behavior of others.